The story begins with a girl crying. The children are good and angelic, unlike any others in the world. A young nun closed her eyes and placed her hands on the little girl's shoulders to comfort her. A boy with black hair also closed his eyes and smiled at the little girl. However, not everyone can be a parent. The young nun and the children turned their heads to see a man standing a few feet away. The man looked down at the children, resting one hand on the black-haired boy's shoulder. While smoking a cigar with his other hand, he announced that from today onwards, he would be the boy's father. These children have received special education for their special parents. The children waved goodbye to the black-haired boy. He looked back as his new father took him away. The children watched as the black-haired boy was taken away. The young blonde-haired nun brought her hands together, closed her eyes, and smiled. Suddenly, her expression changed. Clasping her hands together with a serious look, she told the children it was time to train. With cold expression, the children brought out their weapons. The young nun told Ellie, the blonde girl who was crying, that she shouldn't let her nose get runny like that when she cries. Ellie's innocent face turned stone cold as she wrapped a piece of string around her hands, looking at the nun with a fierce gaze. The blonde nun took off her scarf and, with a serious gaze at Ellie, said that children who behave too well will make their parents hate them. Ellie turned slightly, brought her hand to her nose, and blew away the snot hanging from it. The director of the orphanage, who takes great pride in this special education approach, he views it as a true gift for these kids, who have been trained as living, breathing weapons ever since they learned to walk. These children are raised under extremely strict supervision to meet the standards of the super rich. Due to this meticulous attention to detail, it costs a fortune to train each child properly. Another question that might come to mind is what these kids are actually used for. There's no straightforward answer to this, and the director simply says they're like computers. Their use is decided by the buyers, or as you might call them, the new parents. For example, the rich fat man who just adopted a boy shows his new son a photo of a man and says, "This is his target. Memorize his face." The director then explains that since these children are living weapons, they pose a significant threat to the buyer. So the orphanage ensures that each child is drilled with 3 absolute principles from a young age. These rules, wired into their subconscious minds, are called the 3 absolute principles and are crucial for keeping the children under control. While the fat man is drilling the boy about memorizing the photo, the boy points out that there's a car tailing them closely. The old man, startled by this unexpected observation, starts yelling at the boy, demanding to know what he's talking about and telling him to just focus on memorizing the picture. The boy quickly snaps back to attention and swears to follow orders. That's what the first principle is all about: absolute compliance with the parents' commands. Suddenly, the car tailing them smashes into their vehicle, causing it to flip over from the impact. The boy scrambles out and sees his father badly hurt and barely clinging to life. The second principle these children are drilled with is to never use their powers without their parents' permission. As the boy mourns his father, the attackers get out of their cars with guns in hand. Cautiously approaching the flipped car, they spot the boy crying and begging for help, shouting that his dad isn't breathing. The attackers are taken aback, having no idea there was a child in the car. They decide to toss the boy aside to finish their work, but before they can, the boy whips out a knife and stabs one of them in the throat, causing profuse bleeding. He then quickly snatches the gun from the fallen attacker. Before the other hitman even realizes what's happening, the boy aims the gun at him and shoots him in the head, killing him instantly. And that's what the third rule is all about. Forget the first 2 principles and do whatever it takes to keep your parents safe. The director, meanwhile, couldn't be prouder of his children. He is practically bursting with joy and pride for raising such perfect, exceptional children. He quickly shows the register book containing information about each child and asks the buyer which one he would prefer. But the buyer flatly refuses any of them. So, the old man puts the register book back in the drawer and reluctantly pulls out a file for a child already deemed a defective product. He's disappointed that the buyer is only interested in this particular child. Apparently, this misfit was a real gem, even a favorite of the director. He had the best skills out of all the weapons they had trained, and the old man was practically swooning over him. But the child disappeared, leaving the director wondering if he's even still alive. They've been on a wild goose chase to find him, but since he's parentless, he can't use his powers without permission. With 0 leads, they're in the dark, and he's likely living incognito as just another regular high school kid. Ironically, this supposed ultimate weapon is probably getting pushed around by school bullies. After taking a punch from a guy in a white hoodie, he's down for the count, writhing in agony from that one brutal hit. Being a top-tier weapon doesn't always mean you can handle a schoolyard smackdown. Yusuf, with deadpan eyes, hovers over him, asking how many points he'd give that punch. The poor boy stammers, that's a solid 180,000 points right there." The other bullies high-five Yusuf for racking up such a high score. Yusuf then decides he wants to play further, planning to test his kick to see how many points he can score this time. But before he can approach Hyunho again, a blonde guy shoves Yusuf aside and rushes up to Hyunho, eager to know how many points his punch can earn. Yusuf doesn't appreciate being pushed by some lowly weirdo, and even Hyunho can tell he's pissed about the blonde's shove. So, Yusuf silently strolls over to the riled-up blondie, Sion. When he gets there, he slaps Sion across the face and casually says, "Just paying you back, buddy. No hard feelings." Despite hating the humiliation of the slap, Sion swallows his pride and gives a thumbs up to his friend for a solid 180,000-point slap. Yusuf, with the deadpan eyes, just smiles and casually walks away, telling Sion he can buy him a pack of cigarettes instead of offering flattery. Before Yusuf leaves, Sion challenges him, promising to fight him next time. Meanwhile, Hyunho is completely fed up with these ragtag idiots because he knows he could take them all down in one fell swoop. Still, he plays the role of the dumb weakling, and Sion starts choking him, demanding to know if Yusuf's punch is really better than his. Sion continues bullying him, treating Hyunho like his personal punching bag to vent his frustration, and tells him to tag along for a while. With no way out, Hyunho reluctantly follows the rowdy thug and ends up footing the bill for their meal because Sion claims he's broke after running errands for Yusuf. Sion then wonders aloud who would win if he fought Yusuf head-on. In response, Hyunho says he can't say anything for sure. Out of nowhere, Sion notices the snack shop has the same name as Hyunho, and Hyunho sheepishly admits it's run by his mom. Right on cue, his mother shows up and says if Sion is her son's friend, he can eat as much as he wants. Sion is genuinely surprised to learn this is Hyunho's mother's shop, while Hyunho feels disappointed because he had been trying to keep it a secret. He's unsure why his secret had to come out thanks to this jerk, who's shamelessly licking his lips, likely looking forward to freeloading more food. Seeing the shifty look on his so-called friend's face, Hyunho grabs his pen, ready to poke a hole in Sion's eyes if he tries anything sneaky. Just as he's about to make his move, Sion surprises him by apologizing for not introducing himself properly earlier. He introduces himself as Sion Park, Hyunho's buddy, and comments that he finally understands the shop's unusual name. Hyunho's mom chuckles at the joke and mentions that Hyunho asked her to keep it under wraps. Sion then jabs at his friend, saying he's terrible at hiding things, and that he's also disappointed Hyunho kept such a stunning mom a secret. Hyunho, now completely fed up with Sion's antics, knows he's just trouble. To avoid any more nonsense, he tells his mom they need to leave because other friends are waiting for them. The woman packs some food in a plastic bag and hands it to Sion, telling him to share it with others. She warmly says that all of Hyunho's friends are like her own children, so Sion shouldn't hesitate to take anything. While Hyunho tries to convince her that it's not necessary, Sion's eyes light up at the sight of free food. Sion grabs the bag without a second thought, completely ignoring Hyunho's internal groans. Hyunho feels pathetic, silently begging his mom to reconsider, knowing these guys are just bullies, not real friends. He then pleads with Sion not to share the food with Yusuf or anyone else. Sion agrees with a smirk and says his goodbyes. Hyunho's mom, ever the gracious host, tells Sion to bring more friends next time. Sion enthusiastically agrees, saying he'll definitely come back with a crew. This is exactly what Hyunho was trying to avoid, and here we are. Once Sion is out of sight, Hyunho turns to his mom and vents his frustration. Fighting to hold back tears, he furiously demands to know why she didn't just pretend they weren't related. Seeing her son so upset, his mom is confused and hurt. She tells him she was just happy to meet his friend and apologizes if she caused any trouble. Meanwhile, Hyunho is left questioning the rationality of his outburst. He has no idea why he's yelling at his mom, especially when she's apologizing. He feels awful for acting out. His mom tries to explain that she just wanted him to make more friends, which is why she acted the way she did. Hyunho's hand shakes with frustration and confusion, and he's barely holding himself together. The next day at school, Hyunho sees the same tteokbokki his mom makes sitting right before his eyes. Apparently, Yusef has figured out that Hyunho's mom runs the snack shop down the street and grabbed a bowl for himself. Yusef takes a dirty rag, dips it into his bowl of tteokbokki, and starts rubbing it in Hyunho's face. He complains that he found the rag in his food and demands a refund because he can't eat filth. To make matters worse, Yusef sarcastically asks if he should go directly to Hyunho's mom for the refund. Hyunho is absolutely livid with Sion for revealing his secret despite his pleas to keep it quiet. Trying to stay calm, Hyunho responds coldly, questioning if they even consider themselves friends. This gets under Yusef's skin, and he mocks Hyunho for throwing a tantrum over a little joke. Then, to add insult to injury, Yusef dumps the entire bowl of tteokbokki onto Hyunho's uniform. That's the last straw. Hyunho, already holding his pen, doesn't hesitate to swing his hand and jab the pen straight into Yusef's throat before he can react. His hand stops just short of the mark, trembling as he struggles to keep himself in check. Yusef, not thrilled about being threatened, becomes even more cocky and angry, demanding to know what Hyunho thinks he's doing. A few moments later, Sion strolls into the classroom, only to find everyone in dead silence. The place is a mess. Security guards are on the scene, a window is shattered, blood is splattered across the floor, and Hyunho's glasses are scattered on the ground. It looks like things have taken a serious turn, possibly even an attempted murder by Yusef. Just a moment ago, Hyunho was mercilessly beaten by this jerk for about 15 minutes straight. He begged for mercy, drenched in his own blood, and lost consciousness several times while writhing in pain. Despite his pleas, Yusef didn't stop and continued the relentless beating. When Hyunho was completely worn out and shattered from the brutal assault, he looked out the nearby window and finally ended it by jumping out. Yusef, with no shred of empathy, he casually puffs on his cigarette and tells his friends to confess that they accidentally pushed Hyunho out of the window while messing around. His friends are reluctant to take the blame. In fact, they refuse Yusef outright because they don't want to get into trouble. That's when Yusef brings up a useful Korean law known as the Juvenile Offender Law. He explains that he's no longer eligible for it because he's past the age limit, so he's asking his friends to help him out by confessing that they were the ones who pushed Hyunho out of the window. He insists that this is the only way he can avoid jail time. Still, the other boys are hesitant and remind him that even if they take the blame, they'll face a civil lawsuit. Yusef just shrugs it off, saying he's got that covered too. He then points out that the civil lawsuit hasn't been filed yet, and if they eliminate Hyunho's only surviving family member, his mother, there will be no one left to file the lawsuit. Yusef also brings a suitcase full of cash, offering 10 million won per person in exchange for their help. Once everything's settled, they decide to visit the grieving mother that night. She's sitting in her son's room, surrounded by his belongings, lost in her grief, still trying to cope with the loss of her son. As midnight strikes, the thugs put on their masks and head straight for the 5th floor. Finding the elevator out of order, they opt for the staircase. As they climb, they discover the elevator is jammed because someone has intentionally wedged it with a fire extinguisher, preventing it from moving. Before Yusef can figure out who might have done this, they hear a familiar voice. Sion is sitting on the staircase, already waiting for them to arrive. Yusef quickly asks what he's doing there, while the other lackey is thrilled to see him and invites him to join them. Sion gets up, ready for action, but not before asking 2 important questions. Hyunho Place, which was a hidden gem only he knew about. Yusuf casually pulls down his mask and explains that when Sion didn't bring the cigarettes he was supposed to, he followed him and saw him hanging out with the neighborhood kids. That's when he spotted Hyunho arguing with his mother. Sion realized it was actually because of him that these thugs discovered the place. Sion then moves on to his second question, telling Yusuf to think carefully before answering. He wants to know why they're really there. That's when Yusuf brandishes his iron pipe and says they're just there to deal with Hyunho's mother, prevent her from filing a lawsuit, and ensure she sleeps peacefully. He's actually glad Sion is there too, because he's been getting on his nerves lately. Yusuf brings up the push from earlier and realizes that Sion was just pretending to bully Hyunho while actually trying to protect him. Yusuf admits he was too dense to see it sooner and has been itching to take care of Sion as well. With that, Sion ends the interrogation. He picks up the fire extinguisher and Yusuf swings his giant rod without hesitation. Sion quickly pulls the pin from the extinguisher, aims it at Yusuf, and starts blasting him with the bubbly gas. As their vision blurs, one of the lackeys catches a glimpse of the extinguisher heading straight for his face. Before he knew it, the fire extinguisher smacks him in the face, and the impact sends Yusuf sprawling to the ground as well. He quickly shoves his buddy off and grabs the rod again while handling the other two lackeys. When he sees Yusuf making a move, he skillfully blocks the iron rod with the extinguisher. In a flash, he ducks down and slams the extinguisher onto Yusuf's feet, crushing his toes. Sion then kicks him down the stairs, sending him tumbling backward. As he follows down the stairs, Sion casually informs Yusuf that his cuneiform bone above the metatarsal is broken. He confidently adds that Yusuf won't be walking anytime soon with those shattered legs. Yusuf groans in pain, lying defenseless on the ground, and shakily asks why Sion is doing this to him. Sion then drops the bombshell. He explains that 3 principles were drilled into his mind as a kid. First, a parent's word is absolute. Second, don't use violence without permission. As he said this, he lands a devastating punch right on the guy's head. The other lackeys on the ground are completely lost, not understanding a word of his rant. It turns out, Sion is actually the missing boy from the orphanage, not Hyunho. After losing several teeth and with a broken nose, Yusuf begs for forgiveness and pleads for Sion to stop. But Sion continues, explaining that the third principle is that if there's a threat to the parent's safety, the child can ignore the first 2 rules and handle the situation however necessary to protect the parent. Sion recalls Hyunho's mother saying that all of Hyunho's friends are like her own children, so basically, she's his mother now. And if anyone threatens his mother, he's got the green light to beat them to a pulp. With a resounding bang, Sion smashes Yusuf's skull, the sound echoing through the building. The scene shifts back to the creepy orphanage, where the blonde sister is visiting the director. She informs him there's a call from Korea. When the director asks who it is, she replies that it's Beko personnel. The old man's interest is piqued as he recognizes the caller and quickly grabs the phone. The caller reports that they found the kid they've been hunting for, the legendary figure from the Dead Mansion project, codenamed Sion. Apparently, he's in Korea right now. The orphanage, known as Dead Mansion, is a highly funded multinational organization that produces weapons for the wealthy. In the eyes of the orphanage, he was the perfect child, and his codename is Sion Park. Sion was one of the children created by the Dead Mansion project, the pinnacle of their efforts. He excelled in infiltration, weapon skills, and VIP assassination. He was destined for a top client, a notorious Yakuza organization in Japan. However, a mix-up sent him to Korea instead. The director explains that it's been 5 years since the mishap, and they had almost assumed Sion was dead, so they gave up on him. Now, the man who seems more like a filthy, rich mafia boss than a father is thrilled they found him. The director quickly instructs the sister to bring Sion back as soon as possible, by any means necessary, because he can't wait any longer. The woman, who looks like a nun, let down her black veil, revealing her dead eyes. She promptly adheres to the order, stating she will proceed with the retrieval operation immediately. This lady in question goes by the name Rachel. As soon as she dropped her act as sister, she donned a tight, black, shiny suit, flexing her formidable muscles without holding back. She makes it clear that she will drag Sion back, even if it means using force. This woman is the Dead Mansion instructor, and her specialty remains unknown. However, the director quickly instructs her to simmer down, emphasizing that he needs Sion unharmed and that she doesn't need to use her guns. Embarrassed, she hastily picks up her robe to put it back on, muttering about how she was just getting into character. Kwon Byung-woo, Yusuf's father, bows his head in apology to Hyunho's mother. He promises to cover all medical expenses, mental damages, and any other compensation she might need. However, she firmly states that an apology won't suffice, as this isn't something that can be resolved with words alone. Nearby students are startled to see a wealthy man bowing his head in such a manner. Kwon Byung-woo finally lifts his head and turns around with a blank expression, announcing he will be taking his leave. The woman is utterly baffled by his strange behavior. In response, Kwon Byung-woo covers his face with a handkerchief and reveals that he came to make amends. But since they can't resolve anything through discussion, he decides to leave, as efficiency is key in all matters. He then strides towards his luxurious car, telling the woman that he knows other ways to resolve the mess, as he is quite the expert in such matters. With those parting words, his car speeds off. Once inside, he vents to his butler, complaining about how disgustingly stingy and smelly the place was, insisting they demolish it and construct a mixed-use complex instead. The wealthy man then inquires about Sion, asking his butler if they have dealt with the boy. The butler informs him that their people are already en route, and the secretary will call once the job is done. Kwon Byung-woo nods, gazing out of the car window as they head to Sanlim University Hospital. Yusuf, his leg wrapped in bandages, looked annoyed as he pondered aloud about Sion, sensing something strange about him. He told his dad that Sion, the one who messed him up, was no ordinary boy. He kept rambling about some 3 engraved principles or something like that. His dad raised an eyebrow, asking if this was the new trend among children. Yusuf just shook his head, admitting he hadn't a clue. Before Yusuf could say more, his dad cut him off with a cold stare directed at the nurse, humbly requesting some privacy. Once she was out of the room, he slapped his son hard across the face, just like any typical father. What really grinds his gears isn't just that his son picked a fight, bullied a kid, and caused them to jump out of a window. No. What truly bothers him is that Yusuf didn't clean up the mess afterward, leaving a trail of evidence. His father sternly reminds him that the basics of any job include never having to do something twice. With a menacing stare and lifting one finger, he tells Yusuf to watch closely and learn from this chance to fix things. Meanwhile, Sion gets kicked in the chest by a group of goons sent by Yusuf's father. The 3 men, dressed in 3-piece suits, look like they mean business. The leader puts on a pair of black gloves and watches as his lackeys drag the injured boy from the ground. Sion has no idea why he's being targeted. With a scowl, the leader delivers a series of stinging slaps to Sion's face. He didn't stop until Sion collapsed from sheer exhaustion. The man with glasses looked down at Sion while taking off his gloves, remarking that while Sion might have taken down 4 of his peers at once, things don't work the same way with adults. He then tossed his gloves onto Sion's head. One of the men grabbed Sion's arm, and the burly lackey yanked it straight, holding it firm. The leader then placed his foot on Sion's arm and applied all his weight, leaving him writhing in agony. Before they left, they ensured Sion understands this is payback for the humiliation and beating he inflicted on their young master, Yusuf. They're sparing his life so he can reflect on his mistakes. As dusk settles, Sion sits there, snapping his shoulder back into place with a sneer. He chuckled at how the goons couldn't distinguish between a dislocated and a broken arm, despite all their big talk about being adults. The beating he received from the men was nothing compared to Aunt Rachel's thrashings. Sion was frustrated that he couldn't tap into his full strength without orders, but he is relieved knowing Yusuf won't be bullying anyone else. As he heads out, grumbling to himself, he runs into Hyunho's mother. She recognized him immediately while holding groceries and asked why he looked awful. Sion turned his head and greeted her with a warm smile. She then invited him to dinner. At the table, Sion gazed at the food, lost in thought. Hyunho's mother had prepared a feast, urging him not to be shy and to eat his fill. When Sion heard her command to eat, his facial expression changed. He started to devour the food like a wild beast, driven by an instinct to comply with the care of someone he now sees as his parent. The mother then gently suggested that if he ate all of that in one go, he would get indigestion, and she instructed Sion to drink some water. Sion followed her advice, downing the water with a hearty gulp and letting out a satisfied burp afterward. He thanked her for the meal, and she smiled, happy to see him after such a long time. Sion's mood turned serious as he asked about Hyunho's condition. She assured him that the surgery went smoothly and that Hyunho was doing fine. She was hopeful for his recovery, confident that despite the challenges, Hyunho would overcome them. But then, her strength seemed to crumble. Her hand started to shake, and tears flowed freely. She sobbed, feeling weak compared to her son and helpless as a mother. Her heartfelt wish spilled out. She wanted to destroy everyone who hurt Hyunho, especially Yusuf's father, and tear them all apart. Sion stayed quiet, watching Hyunho's mother sob. As she turned around to apologize for her sudden outburst, Sion was already gone. Nightfall settled over the Byungwoo Construction Company. Inside the building, Yusuf's father concluded a presentation, pleased with the third quarter results. Raising his glass, he thanked everyone for their hard work, acknowledging that Byungwoo Construction had come this far because of their dedication, even after the bankruptcy of their parent company. Among the crowd of employees stood a burly man who had beaten up Sion earlier. He gazed at his empty glass when a waiter in a black suit approached, offering wine. Just as the man said, "Pour some more," the waiter smashed the bottle right over his face. The bottle shattered upon impact, shards of glass flying everywhere. The man stumbled back as Sion smiled and told him he could now drink to his fill. Trying to gather himself, the man went for a counterattack, but Sion was ready. He shoved the broken glass he was holding into the man's hands like handing over a pair of gloves. Shocked by Sion's swift movements, the man looked at his hands, surprised to see glass covering them. But by then, it was too late. Sion swung his leg and kicked the man in the face. Sion grabbed some forks and knives and hurled them at the guards with deadly precision, each one hitting its mark perfectly. It didn't take long for everyone to realize something was wrong. Before anyone could react, several of the black-suited guards were already down, and people began screaming about a blonde boy who had caused all the chaos. The mention of a blonde-haired kid struck a chord with the company director as he watched his employees getting slaughtered. Meanwhile, Sion was hiding under a table, knife in hand. As he lifted the cover, he recalled the principles he had learned at the church, the good children of Dead Mansion. The first principle, a parent's words are absolute. Sion zipped past everyone, slicing through them as if they were nothing more than cucumbers with his tiny knife, adhering strictly to what he had been taught. He couldn't ignore the tears and pleas of the mother who wanted to destroy everyone who hurt her son, including Yusuf's father. So, he's doing exactly what he's been told. Sion grabbed a tablecloth filled with cutlery, and as the men rushed toward him, he threw it at their faces. The weight of the cloth and its contents crushed them, leaving them screaming in pain. As the men stumbled, Sion swung a small table at them, then stood on top of it, pressing his weight down on the fallen men. Just then, a knife flew past him from behind. Sion ducked quickly, and the knife hits one of the black-suited guys in front instead. The one who threw the dagger is the same man with the black gloves, and he's impressed with Sion's reflexes. With a penetrating gaze, he's surprised to see that the arm he was sure he broke is still working. The man declared that this time he would break Sion's arm properly. Before he could finish putting on his black gloves, Sion grabbed his hand and punched him hard across the face. Expertly locking the man's arm, Sion coolly told him to watch closely. This is how to break someone's arm. Twisting the man's arm, he felt the bones crack as the man groaned in pain. As the man sprawled on the ground, a bullet zipped past him. Sion turned slightly to the shooter with a menacing stare. The shooter, Byung-woo, stood on the first floor, looking disappointed for missing his shot. Sion quickly raised his hand and called out that it's tough to hit from that distance unless one is a real pro. Byung-woo, intrigued, asked how he knew and whether he was a pro himself. Walking towards Sion, Byung-woo asked who the boy was. He mentioned hearing that Korean boys these days are into something called a crew, and asked if Sion was part of one. Sion responded that he didn't know what the heck that meant, but if Byung-woo was asking which crew he belonged to, then he proudly stated he was with the Hyunho snack shop. The mention of Hyunho snacks rang a bell for Byung-woo, and he promptly asked if Sion was referring to that smelly alleyway junk food place. With a sneer, Byung-woo shoved the gun barrel right between Sion's eyes and asked if the woman had tipped him off to kill him. Sion, with a menacing gaze, stated that Byung-woo was absolutely wrong because all she had said was to tear and crush him. Surprised by Sion's words, Byung-woo tried to figure out what he meant. With lightning speed, Sion disarmed the man who held the gun to his forehead. Then, he proceeded to punch him. Before Byung-woo could fall, he grabbed hold of Sion's waistcoat, calling him a bastard and questioning if this was revenge for the snack shop mother and son. Sion punched him again, stating this wasn't revenge or retribution, but the first principle. That one punch was enough to scramble Byung-woo's brain, and with Sion's final blow, he hit the ground, his face a bloody mess, nose and mouth bleeding from the impact. Sion made it clear he wasn't there to assist anyone. He was just following his parents' absolute commands. With that, he turned to walk away, while Byung-woo on the ground kept ranting about how he should have taken Sion out when he had the chance, regretting not sticking to his own motto of leaving no work unfinished. The man vowed that next time, he would kill them all. Sion grabbed the man's gun, aimed it at the chandelier, and told him to stop blabbering about pointless stuff. He fired a bullet, causing the chandelier to snap and crash down, crushing the man. As he walked away, Sion muttered the third principle. If there's a threat to a parent's safety, resolve the situation by any means necessary. Shaking his head, he muttered how both the father and son were really just the same. Back at the hospital, the nurse asked Yusuf if he was feeling any discomfort. Covering his face with his hand, he retorted that it should be obvious he was in pain. The nurse mentioned she'd heard school violence could be intense these days, but she'd never seen anyone as badly hurt as him before. Yusuf lifted his hand and peeked at the nurse. However, she wondered aloud if the kid who hit him must have been a real expert at fighting. Even for high schoolers, this was pretty extreme. As she squatted down to pick up her things, Yusuf observed her closely. She grabbed a syringe and, with a piercing gaze, asked Yusuf what he had been discussing with his father earlier about some 3 principles. Noticing the strange color of the injection, Yusuf questioned what the heck she was about to inject him with. Rachel then pulled off her mask, laughing as she reassured him not to worry. She stated that as long as she only used half, he wouldn't die. Sitting next to Yusuf, she leaned forward, pressing her arm against his chest, and questioned him again about the absolute 3 principles. Yusuf winced in pain, closing one eye and gritting his teeth. Rachel leaned forward, locking eyes with Yusuf, and asked if he knew what the 3 principles meant. Yusuf stared back, intimidated by Rachel's dominating gaze. Yusuf yelled that he didn't know what Rachel was talking about and demanded she get out of his room. That's when Rachel ripped off her wig and stopped playing games. She straightforwardly demanded if Yusuf knew a boy named Sion. Rachel is known as a disciplinarian for Dead Mansion, specializing in disguise, infiltration, interrogation, and of course, torture.